And welcome to another episode of 50 Shades in Grey on this beautiful summer's evening in the UK. Nowhere better in the world, in my opinion, when it's bright and sunny in London. So last month I read in the paper that Labour are rolling out a new manifesto for resilience in schools, which got me to thinking about the subject of resilience. And I thought it is something that we should speak about on the podcast, to do with where our resilience comes from, why children these days seem to be lacking in resilience, or is it for want of another explanation? And also just looking at how, as parents, maybe we can help our children, and even if it has any effect on how we parent our children, is it just something that has changed over the years? Like many of you probably, when I reflect back on my own upbringing and how we were brought up, we tended to learn resilience at school, life lessons in the playgrounds. And a lot of the time that was probably, for me, and I think my peers and my friends around me, through going through emotional toughness times to actually build resilience. Because surely in order to have resilience, you've got to have been allowed to some degree to experience situations that you learn from and thereby build your resilience, which, from talking to a lot of teachers, parents aren't giving their children that chance anymore. They're far too quick to jump into situations. And I completely get it. As a parent, our job is to bring up our kid. You know, that's all we see. So in a situation within a school, let's say, or a playground outside, your lookout is for your kid, and your loyalties and your protection is, rightfully so, is always going to be of your child. To give you an example, if you see your child fall over, what's the first thing you do? Is the first thing you do run over? Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? Get up. Or do you count to 5 and do you see what reaction they have and judge for yourself how bad that fall was? Now, been teaching for as long as a lot of my friends have that are teachers, they tell me that when you see someone fall over, you can tell the severity of that fall a lot of the time. And on many occasions, when they instantly cry, maybe that's the time just to give them a few seconds. Now, we're not speaking about leaving them for 5 or 10 minutes. It's just to allow them some time to say, right, I've fallen over. It's hurt. Let me get my breath. Let me stand up and let me see if it needs attention. As kids, I remember, and I'm sure the same for a lot of the listeners out there, I remember coming in with cuts, bruises all over me. I don't often remember too many plasters. I very seldom remember my mum ever running over through, and that's not a criticism of the way that I was brought up at all. But again, a lot of the time, she probably had no idea where I was. And maybe that's been the change. And I understand why that's been a change. You know, as kids growing up, we were playing out in the streets from very young ages. You'd sort of go out, for me, play on the estate or, the area that we lived in, and we'd be down drains, we'd be in the storm vents, and, we'd be absolutely everywhere in some disgusting places that, I would probably have never let my son Zach do. But as kids, we just used to be a bit feral, I guess, didn't we? We used to just go out, and as long as you came back when you was hungry, you got called in from the door, and a lot of the time, if you didn't go by the second or third call, you were going to get a telling off. So you made sure that you got yourself back there. Now I get that. We can't do that anymore. Roads have got busier. Life's changed. Everything's changed. And we have to adapt to how kids are brought up now. The world, I don't think the world's any more of a dangerous place than it used to be. I just think we're far more aware now because of the news coverage, social media and everything else, that it is so much more of a dangerous place. Maybe we were living in ignorance before, where you didn't hear about some of the awful things that can go on. So maybe that's attributed to the fact that now we're very much on our kids. We know where they are every minute of the day, and it's it's not always organised play, I find a lot of the time. We might let them out in the garden, but even then, like, I think maybe people now will have one eye on them in case they fall off the swing, or, they get on the trampoline and fall off. So where are we actually teaching our children resilience? Where are they experiencing these negative times to actually build resilience to it? Can you teach something that you don't experience sometimes? That's probably a bigger question. We can talk about growth mindset and all these things that, schools are doing now, and getting children to speak about their problems and using words that they can express their emotions. But if we're not allowing them to, using the analogy of fall over a few times and hurt themselves, where are they going to, build that resilience to go, okay, I've done this before. I've fallen over before. I know how this goes. This is going to be sore for a couple of days, but I'll get there. I'll be okay. But if we're too quick to run over, pick them up all the time, is that just going to make them think, well, there's always going to be someone there to help me? Now, if they grow up thinking there is always going to be someone there to help me, hopefully as parents, we always will be. But what when something happens that they don't tell you about, or you don't know about, or you're not there for? How are they going to deal with it then? What's going to be their first reaction? And if the hardest thing to do, I guess, is think about a worst case scenario for you. And I know in the podcast that we did previously with Anna Mathen, she spoke about the unspeakable truths. And I think that's one of them, where we, those images or those thoughts of the worst things that can happen to your children. Like, I think if that was to happen, how would your young child, young adult, how would they deal with that? Are we giving them the skills to be able to do that? Or are we, through no fault of our own maybe, protecting them so much that when we're not there, they're just going to fall apart? They're just going to fall apart because they're not going to have any coping strategies to deal with these situations. It's funny when we talk about the language as well, because I was background TV, if you like. I think it was Temptation Island. For those that, I'm sure lots of you have watched it, a bit of a sort of a guilty pleasure. But I watched that, and it was an American program as well. And basically they get a lot of extremely good looking people and tempt them to cheat on their other halves away from their other halves, and then they discover things. So your normal kind of reality TV, which is quite addictive to watch. But I listened, and these guys, I guess, were early 20s, late 20s, and I listened to some of their conversations, and I didn't understand half of them, and not the content, but the way they spoke to each other. It was therapy talk. All of it was therapy talk to each other. It was, I hear you, I understand you, but I don't follow what. And when you think, just say, I don't agree with you. Like, I don't know where we're going with this language now. And maybe it's as you grow older, you sort of move on from it. But there were some of the things that were just said, what just baffled me. I think the best one I heard, so I'll give you the quick outline to the story. One of the guys his girlfriend had found out that he'd cheated on her, and they were sort of gone on to Temptation Island to try and resolve the situation. Yeah, that's got to tell you everything you need to know straight away about what's going to happen there. Let's put the person that's cheated in an island with loads of really beautiful women around him, and then see if he does it again. But the best thing that this guy said, which I found amazing actually, and I wanted to stand up and give him a round of applause because it was so absurd, that he said to this girl when they were talking, he said, most importantly, I've forgiven myself. I was like, what does that even mean? Most importantly, I've forgiven myself. Surely that's the last thing that you should be worried about, was forgiving yourself. And this was his explanation for cheating to the girl, and about how she can't keep bringing it up. And he said the most important thing is, I forgive my, now that's a therapist. That's got to be his therapist telling him that. But he's all these therapists speak all the time, which is nothing wrong with it. But it's got to the stage where everyone is so understanding of everything that no one doesn't seem to be listening to or solving the problems in the first place because they're so busy using words that, and the sentences were so fluffy. They were so pink and fluffy, all of the sentences that they spoke to each other. And these are not just one-liners. These are complete entire sentences that they're using with each other, where it's just pink and fluffy. Everything was pink and fluffy. And if our children are growing up in that, watching these things, which I think a lot of them do, you know, how are we going to have these people, young adults, you know, that are going to be able to deal with things, you know, that are going to be able to deal with losing your job, having a family, 3 crying babies, you know, the worst things that life throws at you. And we all know this. How are they going to have the skills to get through these things when we're not letting them experience these things? Or is it going to be for the better? You know, I'm playing devil's advocate here in my opinions maybe and saying, you know, maybe this is for a better world. Or, you know, because I remember at school, you know, bullying was horrendous and there was very, very little done about it. And I went to an East London school and I saw it all around me, you know, and there was not a lot done about it. It was a very violent era, I think. And then later on, there become more awareness of it. Brilliant. And then now it's got to the stage of, again, when I speak to teachers, it's like every time someone disagrees with someone in a school environment, the parents are like, they're being bullied. No, they're not being bullied. You know, I've seen what bullying is. They're not being bullied. If they've been told that someone doesn't want to play with them, that's not bullying. And sometimes that happens. You know, kids have got to learn to get on with each other completely. They've also got to learn not to get on with each other because you're going to end up in a workplace like we all are. And there's people that you work with that you get on great. And there's people that you work with that you don't get on great with. And somehow you're going to need to get through those times and work out how are you going to get on with this person, even though you're going to be spending very limited time with them because you don't like each other. And that's fine. It's quite easy. You know, you've got to learn to ignore people or not speak to people. It seems to be part of life that, you know, you've got to have the ability to get on with people and be friendly with people, but you've got every right not to get on and be friendly with people that you don't share the same values or your thoughts don't align with each other. And it doesn't mean that one of you is wrong. It just means you think differently. You know, we spoke about this in relationships on a podcast a couple of weeks ago. You might get to a stage where you just think differently and no one has to be in the wrong. It doesn't have to be anyone's fault. It just means that you agree not to get on and go different ways. And, you know, that happens at schools as well, where, you know, I don't want to play with him. You know, he ruins the games or she ruins the games and they're always bossy. So fine, don't play with each other. It doesn't have to be bullying. We're very quick now, I think, to jump in on all these things. And I think we're taking away opportunities sometimes for our children to actually learn lessons about how to be resilient and how to get on with people. And I'm sure, and I know from speaking to teachers that they are constantly experiencing this at all different levels, at sort of private school levels and state schools levels. Circumstances might be very different, but the root of the problem seems to be exactly the same, that we're stepping in sometimes way too quick. Now, I think as educators as well and as parents, we need to be able to distinguish those issues as well. What's the difference between those issues? What is actually bullying and what is two kids that just don't get on? And I know there can be physical and there can be emotional bullying as well. So we have to be aware of that. But it doesn't always have to be emotional if one kid says they don't like each other or one kid says, I don't like you. Sometimes kids have got every right to do that. As adults, we're going to do that. You know, we choose not to speak to people that we don't like. Why do you not speak to him? I don't like him. Simple as that. I choose not to. Or he doesn't like me, so we just don't speak. And that works great for both of us because we've got nothing to do with each other. Now, I understand our parenting, and I'm very guilty of this, I know myself, but I understand our parenting is probably a reflection of how we were brought up ourselves, and we emulate the things that we thought were really good, and we probably magnify the things that we thought were really bad and do completely the opposite. So maybe it was, if maybe you felt you were neglected as a child in terms of attention or time, that you might go overboard on that with your own child. So you give them too much attention and too much time. And I've always been a great advocate as the best part of parenting, or the most important part of parenting, is showing up. But I also think it's what you do when you show up. You don't have to control the situation the whole time. I remember, and I think this is a prime example of how things have changed. I remember now, when I was at school, if I got in trouble at school, the last thing that I would do would be go home and tell my mum. Because I knew if I went home and told my mum that I'd been shouted at school or told off at school, I was about to get another telling off. So you worked out very quickly, I'll just deal with this on my own. Now, that's not to say that a good few years ago when we was at school, there were teachers that shouted way too much and shouted at you, and it was in your face, and it was very daunting sometimes. That doesn't happen anymore. You have raised voices, but now raised voices can be seen, people think they're being shouted at. It's like, you've just been spoken to. We're not shouting at you. We're speaking to you. But I think children now, as I understand from a lot of teachers, even find that very difficult. And then they go home and they talk to their parents, and then it turns into a situation because our parents, and I've been guilty of this myself. You then go, right, well, I'm not having my kid going through what I went through. No way. So I'm going to be down that school. I'm going to be emailing that school. I'm going to be putting pressure on that school. What are you going to do about this? Actually, what we're doing is we're not allowing our children to then learn that, there are times when you might be spoken to, and it might be for a very good reason. It might be for a reason that you completely disagree with. But how many times, have we been at work when someone's had a go at you for something you think, well, that's not my fault, but you know that at the same time, you're going to have to sit there and take a little bit of it, because even though you think it's not fair, and even though you think it's not right, because that's going to be a lot better for you just to go, okay, fine, all right, and then move on. Now, aren't we building resilience if we do things that way? Aren't we maybe helping our children that way? So when we show up, it's about what we do when we show up. Another analogy for you, and coming through, working with football so much, it's the parent on the sideline. Now, I'm sure those that have played all sorts of sports, and their kids are playing sports, you will have seen it. The most important thing, the one thing you don't want to see is, the kid that's always there with no one supporting them. That kid needs support. They need someone there. But maybe what they don't need, to the other extreme, is the parent that shows up and shouts every decision, makes every decision for them when they're playing. So using football as an example, you'll have the mum or the dad going, get the ball, beat him, pass it over there, do this, do it. And they are literally doing everything for them, everything that they're doing. So they're not learning anything for themselves because they're not making decisions for themselves. Counter argument to that is very, very top level of football. You have extremely highly paid players being shouted at by extremely highly paid managers telling them exactly what to do. So there's the counter argument to it. I think what I would say is, but in that situation, you're talking about elite level, and you're talking about a guy that's shouting that has got the experience, and that's why he's being paid the big bucks to get the other players to do what he wants them to do, and he knows what the other players can do. Where the other example of the dad on the sideline, they're just kids and they're learning, and they need to be able to make mistakes, fall over, get hit by the ball. and then move on from that. So I think we need to allow our kids to get hit by the ball. We need to allow them to fall over, and we need to allow them to experience things that we may not be comfortable with ourselves. And as long as we keep a sense of what is really important to tackle and what we should just keep an eye on, don't go in straight away. If it happens 2 or 3 times, maybe then it's a conversation. But every time that the child comes home and says, I've been told off, we shouldn't maybe so quick to go, right, I'm down that score. Because we all see things from our different points of view. And especially as children, we have a tendency to see things completely differently. And sometimes it may not be how the adult has perceived it. It can be completely different. And that's their opinion. But it doesn't mean that that child is always relaying to you, the right side of the story, let's say. So when you look back at your own school life, obviously what we learned was in the classroom. But what do you think the biggest lessons, where did we learn the biggest lessons, do you think? Was it in PE changing rooms? Was it in the playground? Was it at lunchtime? Where did we learn those resilient skills? Where did we learn how to get on with people? Where did we learn how to make friends? Most of the time, it's in those times when we're not supervised. I went to a school recently, very, very big school, very, very prestigious school. And it was at lunchtime, and there was kids everywhere, hundreds of kids. And they was all on their play areas and everywhere. I looked around and I didn't see one member of staff out there. And these kids were between the ages of probably 8 upwards to 17, 18. And they was all in slightly different areas, but I didn't see any staff at all. They were just running around everywhere. And at first I thought, there's no one supervising them. But then I thought, is that a bad thing? Or have they just been allowed freedom? Are they just been allowed to do stuff, that they should be doing? Like we said before, are they being allowed to fall over? And when they fall over and realise there's no one around, is there a difference in how they act? There's no one here, so I've either got to get up and get on with it, or I've got to take myself inside to the first aid. So now I need to make a decision. How bad is what I've done? And a lot of the time, I'd probably guess that they would just stay and carry on playing and then forget about it and then be fine. What they've learned is to get up and get on. And then what also they've learned is if something is bad, I need to go and get help. And I think that's the thing that we're preventing them from. I also think there's a balance to it, because I did look around and thought this could be absolute carnage and something could go dreadfully wrong. So I do think there needs to be supervision from a distance, let's say, but not to the point where they're suffocated, where everything that goes on, every altercation is then refereed by an adult. Are the kids being allowed to argue? I'm sure if you can think back to your own school life, the arguments people used to have. And now I find with talking to teachers, they tell me that a lot of the drama that goes on with people, it's just stupid arguments. But have they just lost the ability to be able to argue with each other because we've been so protective of they've been bullied, they've been this, they've been that, that they've now got no coping mechanisms for it. So everything just turns into a frenzied drama argument. Or is it that, like I said before, like when we look back to how we were brought up, they don't go out and play anymore, do they? They're not able to. We don't allow them to for very good reasons. There's a lot of dangers out there that we're aware of now. But now it's on phones, and I know you could go back and your parents are saying, to a degree that we didn't have, you didn't have all these things before. So you did other things. There were other things that you did. Is it going to be that way now? Is it going to be different for our kids? Is this just something that we are going to have to accept and go, no, it is different now. They need to have experience of therapy. They're they're not going to be resolving things on their own because they don't need to. They can go to a therapist. This report that I saw that the government are plowing loads of money into mental health to combat mental health and absences from school because that's growing. Is this a problem that is from we've not allowed them the skills to deal with these things, or is it a problem that's, just evolved from how we grow up now and how technology is different, life is different, everything's different. You walk down, someone asked me the other day, they said, I need to get something. Can you let me know near you what clothes shops there were in your high street? Where I live is a big high street. So I walked down there. I found one, a Marks and Spencer's and a Sainsbury's that do clothes. Sainsbury's never used to do clothes, but now high streets are just nail bars, hairdressers and food places because everything is so more accessible online now. And why wouldn't you shop online? Because you've got more choice. You can get it cheaper. You can get it faster. You don't have to leave your house. So that's great. But is that where things have changed so much now that we can't look back at how it was because now it's completely different? Now, that will bring us nicely onto our next podcast because over the next couple of weeks, I'll be speaking to someone that had a job in schools and come out of schools and is now working in a different sector of schools and has had some great experience with how she thinks schools need to change and how schooling should be different. And I'm a big advocate of this. I think the world has changed so much over the last 30, 40, 50 years, but I don't think that school systems have changed with it. I think they're archaic now. I think a lot of the time how our children learn now is not the same as it was before. And I don't think it was particularly right before for a lot of kids. It was just the way that it was and we got on with it. But it still seems to be the same now when things have drastically changed so much and the kids are so much different. It was lovely the other day where I work, we had our sports day and I was lucky enough that 4 or 5 of the boys that I used to teach that are all grown men now, and they all came back to see me. Lovely lads, really great lads, were a credit to their parents and a credit to the schools that they've been to as well. But it made me think about what they were like when I had them at school. And it's so different in such a short time. And I can't put my finger. It doesn't mean the kids that I've got now aren't going to be nice people or just as nice as these lads, because they will be. And their parents are just as nice as well. But there was, I don't know, it was just, there was a difference. It just seemed to be, they had different attributes. They had stronger resolute. They had a lot more resilience, to situations. They could have arguments with each other without needing a referee or someone stepping in between them. They could verbalise their arguments quite clearly as well with each other. They knew when they was upset each other and they knew what it was about. It wasn't pink and fluffy language. It wasn't swearing, but it was like, I don't like what you've done, so leave me alone. It was straightforward. And next week, that is where we're going to be looking at over the next couple of weeks. We're going to be looking at our school systems as well. What alternatives there are to those now, what people's ideas are outside of these establishments that have come out and are looking back at it now and saying, like, I've had this idea. I think this might work. So I think a lot of you will find it very interesting as well, because I'm aware that a lot of people now are experiencing situation with their kids that they're finding it very difficult to deal with as well. Because, as parents, we always feel like we've done everything right. And now it just seems to be different for reasons that we can't find, the reasons that we don't know. And that's the most frustrating thing and worrying thing for parents sometimes as well, is they don't know why. There's nothing they've done. They can't find a reason. Their kids can't give them a reason. So I think we need to look at things from different angles and talk about it. As always on my podcast, 50 Shades in Grey, I've started on one subject and then gone around and diverted to about 5 others. So my apologies for that, but it's kind of the way my brain works as well. Guys, listen, thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. Any comments on it and, feedback on it, I'd appreciate it. I'm sure you've experienced a lot of this with your young kids, your older kids and kids going into adulthood as well. So let me know. It'd be a great topic to talk about. But thank you for joining 50 Shades again. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow, make sure you like, make sure you do all those things that are good for the podcast. And it keeps growing. So thank you. Take care, guys. Bye.